My hands were shaking when I found it. Not from anger, not yet. Just the trembling of someone whose entire world was about to crack open, and I didn't even know it yet. I was organizing my husband's desk, a simple Tuesday afternoon task, when a folded receipt slipped from between two accounting ledgers. The paper was cream-colored, expensive-looking. Riverside Hotel, a room number, a date, our anniversary, and a name that made my breath catch in my throat. P. Summers. That's my sister's name. My sister, Patricia. And something in my chest told me that nothing would ever be the same after that moment. Real, life-inspired emotional stories from USA, Canada, UA, and Europe, filled with truth, betrayal, love, and redemption. Each story touches the soul and reveals what really happens behind closed doors. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing to Grandma True Stories. It helps more people know they're not the only ones going through heartbreak. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Margaret Richardson, though most people call me Maggie. I'm 67 years old, and for 42 years, I believed I had a good marriage. Not a perfect one, no marriage is, but a solid one. A partnership. A life built on trust. I was a high school English teacher for 38 years before I retired 5 years ago. I taught students about the great love stories in literature, Romeo and Juliet, Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, the devoted couples in the novels of Jane Austen. I taught them about loyalty and commitment, and the kind of love that survives hardship. I believed in those stories, and I believed I was living one. My husband David is an accountant, has been for 45 years. He's organized, detailed, methodical. The kind of man who balances checkbooks to the penny and files his taxes months before the deadline. He's not romantic, he never was, but I learned early on that his way of showing love was through consistency. Showing up, being reliable, providing for our family, that was David's love language, and I had learned to read it fluently. We have one daughter, Sarah, who's 39 and lives in Portland with her family. We have 3 grandchildren who light up my world. David and I had built a life together in our small colonial house in Connecticut, complete with a garden I tended lovingly and a library. David joked was my second husband. He meant it as a compliment. Free. But 2 years ago something shifted. It was subtle at first. The kind of shift you don't notice until one day you look up and realize the person sleeping beside you has become a stranger. David started working late, more late. Then later still, he'd come home around 9 or 10, smelling faintly of cologne and exhaustion. He'd eat the dinner I'd kept warm, ask about my day in that distant, polite way you ask hotel concierge for directions, and then retreat to his study. The firm is understaffed, he'd say. Quarterly reports are backing up. I have to pull my weight. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? David had always been honest, predictable, safe. Our anniversary came up, our 42nd. I had been looking forward to it for months. Not in an over-the-top way. I'm not that kind of woman. But quietly, hopefully. 42 years deserved acknowledgement. I thought maybe David would surprise me with dinner reservations somewhere nice, or flowers, or even just an evening without his phone buzzing with work emails. 3 days before our anniversary, I asked him what he had planned. Maggie, he said, looking genuinely apologetic, I have to work that night. I know it's terrible timing, but the Hartley account is in crisis. I promised I'd handle the year-end reconciliation. I can't back out. My heart sank, but I said nothing. This was becoming our pattern. Important dates were being swallowed by work. My birthday had passed with a card and a restaurant reservation that he'd canceled at the last minute. Our grandson's graduation, the same story. That's all right, I heard myself say, the way I'd learned to say it, the way women of my generation were taught to say it, to accept, to understand, to be the reasonable one. I'll make something nice here at home. He kissed my forehead, actually kissed it like I was his child, not his wife, and thanked me for understanding. That afternoon, I decided to organize his desk as a sort of therapy, something to do with my hands so I wouldn't feel the sadness settling in my chest like fog. David's study is his sanctuary. He doesn't like me moving things around in there, but he'd mentioned that he couldn't find a file, and I thought I'd help. I was being the good wife. Supporting him. Making his life easier. The desk is an old mahogany piece his mother left him. It's beautiful but cramped with papers, a physical manifestation of his orderly mind. Receipts, statements, files organized in stacks that probably made sense to him and no one else. I started carefully, respectfully, moving things only slightly to dust beneath them. That's when the receipt fell out. It was tucked between two accounting ledgers, the cream-colored paper folded in half. My first thought wasn't suspicion, it was mundane. Maybe he'd left a restaurant receipt there. Maybe he'd had lunch with a client. But as I unfolded it, my eyes caught on the letterhead Riverside Hotel. My stomach did something strange. A twist. A flip. The Riverside Hotel is small, modest. The kind of place that caters to business travelers passing through. It's about 15 minutes from our house. I knew it existed but had never been inside. There was no reason for David to be staying at a hotel 15 minutes from home. I read the receipt more carefully. Room 247, one night. The date was circled in red pen, September 15th. September 15th. Our 42nd anniversary. My hands began to shake, not from anger yet. I was still in the fog of not understanding. But something cold and thin like ice was creeping up my spine. The name on the receipt made my breath stop. P. Summers. Patricia. My sister Patricia. Everyone calls her Patty. I stood there in the afternoon light streaming through David's study window. The receipt trembling in my hands, and the world tilted. Slowly, deliberately, my mind began fitting pieces together. Pieces I hadn't even realized were scattered on the floor. The late nights. The Kalan I didn't recognize. The distant way he looked at me now, like I was a painting he'd stared at so long he'd stopped actually seeing it. The way he seemed relieved when I said I'd stay home on our anniversary. He wasn't working? I whispered to the empty room. He wasn't working. On our anniversary, my husband was at a hotel 15 minutes from our house, with my sister, in a room registered under her name. I sat down in his leather desk chair, the one he'd sat in every evening for the past 10 years, and I felt something inside me crack, quietly and completely, like old ice breaking on a frozen lake. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just held the receipt and stared at it, reading the same words over and over, hoping they would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Something that meant anything other than what it so clearly meant. My sister, my husband, a hotel room, our anniversary. I didn't confront David that night. I couldn't have even if I'd wanted to. The words were trapped somewhere deep in my throat, crystallized into something too hard and too heavy to speak. Instead, I slipped the receipt into my cardigan pocket and went about my evening as if the ground beneath my feet was still solid. I made dinner, baked salmon with asparagus, the way he likes it. I set the table with our good plates, the Wedgwood china we'd received as a wedding gift. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat across from him at our dining table, looking at his familiar face, the same face I'd been looking at for 42 years, and tried to see a stranger in it. He came home at 7:30, earlier than he had in months. He was in a good mood, almost buoyant, humming something I didn't recognize. He kissed me on the cheek. He asked about my day. He told me a story about a client at the firm. He was performing normalcy so well that for a moment, I wondered if I was insane, if the receipt was a dream, if I'd imagined the whole thing. But then he excused himself to his study, and I heard the sound of his laptop opening. I sat alone at the table and felt the receipt burning in my pocket like a coal. I needed more information. I needed to understand what I was actually looking at before I destroyed my marriage over it. That's what I told myself, anyway. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of what I might find. Afraid of what it might mean. Afraid of the person I might become if I let myself fully believe what that receipt seemed to be telling me. So I did something I had never done in 42 years of marriage. I started to investigate my husband. The next morning, David left for work at his usual time. I waited until his car turned the corner, and then I went into his study. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might break through my ribs. I felt like a burglar in my own house. His desk was back to its usual state of organized chaos. I opened the drawers methodically, carefully, trying not to disturb anything. Credit card statements, bills, insurance documents, and then, in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath some old tax returns, I found a folder labeled personal. Inside were more receipts, many more. My vision blurred as I spread them across the desk. Riverside Hotel. 6 times over the past 6 months, always on weekends, always registered under P. Summers. The dates were carefully noted, and as I looked at them, I began to recognize a pattern. Every other Friday, like clockwork, like a routine. My hands were shaking again, but this time there was anger underneath the tremor. I found his iPad in the study. He often left it charging there. I knew his password. We'd always been open about these things, or so I thought. It was our daughter Sarah's birth year followed by our lucky number. Something we'd chosen together years ago, when we still believed in transparency. I scrolled through his messages. There were texts in a thread labeled, Patricia, not Patty, Patricia. A formality that somehow made it worse. I miss you. When can we see each other again? From David, dated 3 days ago, Friday, same place. From Patricia, dated 2 days ago, I've never felt this way before. Not even with M. From David, the M was me. Margaret, his wife of 42 years, was now just an initial. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I sat down on his leather chair, the one I'd sat in yesterday, when the world had first cracked open, and I read their messages like I was reading a script for a play in which I was not a character. I was just an audience member, watching my own life unfold on stage. The messages went back 8 months. 8 months. That's how long this had been happening. 8 months of my husband building a secret life with my sister. Are you happy? Patricia had written in February. Happier than I've been in years. David had responded. I looked up at the portrait of us on his bookshelf. It was from our 30th anniversary party. We were smiling, his arm around me. We looked happy in that photo too. I wondered if he'd been unhappy for those extra 12 years, and I'd just been too blind to see it. I found emails next. Longer, more detailed. They had met at a family gathering. A barbecue at Sarah's house 18 months ago. Patricia had been going through a difficult divorce, and David had been there to support her. That's how he phrased it in one of the emails. I was just trying to be there for her. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. They'd started meeting for lunch. Then coffee. Then 8 months ago, the Riverside Hotel. I know this is wrong. Patricia had written at one point. But I can't stop. I don't want to stop. David's response? Neither do I. I closed the iPad and sat in the silence of his study. The sun was still streaming through the windows. The world outside was continuing normally. Cars were passing, birds were singing, people were going about their days. But inside this room, inside my chest, everything had stopped. My sister. My own sister. Patricia is 6 years younger than me. We grew up together in a small town in Massachusetts. We shared a bedroom until we were teenagers. I taught her how to braid her hair. I helped her study for her exams. When her first marriage fell apart, I was the one who held her while she cried. I drove to her apartment at midnight because she called me, desperate and alone. And this was how she repaid that loyalty. And David who had promised me forever. David, who had walked me down the aisle and slipped a ring on my finger and said vows in front of God and our families. David, who had held my hand through 2 miscarriages and the death of my parents. David, who had built a life with me, brick by brick, year after year. He had chosen to betray that. To destroy it. To make a mockery of everything we'd built. I spent the rest of the day in a haze. I called Sarah under the pretense of catching up, but I couldn't tell her. The words wouldn't come. What would I even say? Your father is having an affair with your Aunt Patricia? I couldn't put that poison in the world. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. That evening, I watched David eat dinner. I watched him scroll through his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. I watched him and felt like I was looking at a photograph of someone I used to know, someone who was already dead and buried, replaced by this imposter wearing his face. After he went to bed, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold, and I made a decision. I would find out everything. Not to confront him. Not yet. But to understand, to gather the truth like someone gathering evidence before a trial. Because I suspected that when this was all over, when I finally let this volcano erupt, I would need to know exactly where I stood. I would need to understand what had happened to my marriage, to my family, to my sister. I would need to know whether there was anything left worth saving, or whether the entire foundation of my life had been built on a lie. The receipt from the Riverside Hotel felt lighter in my pocket now, like it had been burning away into ash. But the weight in my chest had only grown heavier. I looked at the clock. It was 11:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, our 42nd anniversary would officially be over. David and I had never missed celebrating an anniversary. Not once in 42 years. We would exchange cards. He would usually give me flowers. I would make his favorite dessert. It was a small ritual, but it was ours. This year he was upstairs sleeping, unaware that our anniversary had passed. And I was in my kitchen, holding the evidence of his betrayal, knowing that everything was about to change. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room watching the hours turn over, and I made a list, the dates of the hotel visits, the cost of each stay, the timeline of the messages, everything I knew and all the questions that remained unanswered. If I was going to survive what was coming, I needed to be methodical about it. I needed to approach this the way a detective approaches a case, removing emotion and focusing on facts. That was the only way I could possibly make sense of the wreckage. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink, I made another decision. I would call Patricia. I waited until David left for work. I waited until my hands stopped shaking enough that I could hold the phone without my voice betraying the fury and pain that were churning inside me like a storm. Then I called my sister. Patricia answered on the third ring. "Maggie, hey, is everything okay? Everything okay?" As if the world was still spinning on its axis. As if my marriage wasn't crumbling like old plaster. As if she hadn't spent the last 8 months betraying me with my husband. "We need to talk," I said quietly. "In person. Today, can you come over?" There was a pause, a long one. I could hear the shift in her breathing, the moment she understood that I knew. That this wasn't a casual call about recipes or grandchildren or whatever mundane things sisters talk about when they're pretending not to be destroying each other's lives. "Maggie. Can you come over or not?" I kept my voice level, controlled, like a teacher addressing a disruptive student. "Yes." "Okay, what time?" "Noon." I hung up before she could say anything else. My heart was racing so hard I thought I might be having a heart attack. I pressed my hand to my chest and forced myself to breathe slowly, the way I'd taught my students to do when they were nervous before a presentation. In through the nose, out through the mouth. In, out, in, out. I had 4 hours. I spent them cleaning the house obsessively. It's what I do when I'm anxious, I clean. I vacuumed the living room twice. I reorganized the kitchen cabinets. I washed windows even though they were already spotless. It gave my hands something to do while my mind spiraled with questions and accusations and things I didn't even know how to say. At 11:55, Patricia's car pulled into my driveway. She looked smaller than I remembered her looking, though I'd seen her just 2 weeks ago at a family dinner. She was wearing a blue dress I'd never seen before, and her hair was styled differently, softer, more flattering. Probably a hairstyle David had complimented her on. Probably something she'd changed to please him. I opened the door before she could knock. "Come inside," I said. Patricia's eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Good, I thought. And then I hated myself for thinking it. We sat across from each other in the living room, the room where we'd hosted family dinners for decades, where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries and holidays, the room where David and I had danced to our wedding song on New Year's Eve all those years ago, the room where everything had always felt safe. "How long?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded like a stranger's voice, cold, hard, precise. Patricia didn't ask what I meant. She knew. 8 months, she whispered. "How did it start?" She looked down at her hands. Her nails were painted a soft coral color. Probably a shade David had told her looked nice. Everything about her suddenly looked like a betrayal. Her clothes, her hair, her posture. Even the way she was breathing felt like an insult. "The barbecue at Sarah's," Patricia said quietly. "Remember, last summer." I remembered. I'd spent the entire afternoon making potato salad and coleslaw. I'd laughed at David's jokes. I'd introduced him to Sarah's new neighbors. I'd been happy. "David was so kind to me that day," Patricia continued. "You remember? I was falling apart over the divorce. I was lost and scared and angry, and David he listened. He understood. He said things that made me feel less alone. So you decided to sleep with him." Patricia flinched. "It wasn't like that. Not at first. We just met for coffee a few times. To talk. I was going through so much with the divorce, and David was available. He was there. He was my husband," I said quietly. "He was supposed to be there for me. He was supposed to be my person. That's what marriage means." Tears started streaming down Patricia's face. "I know. God, Maggie, I know. And I hate myself for it. Every single day I hate myself. Not enough to stop." I observed. She didn't answer. We both knew I was right. "Does he love you?" I asked. The question came out smaller than I expected it to, more vulnerable. I hated how much I needed to know the answer. Patricia looked at me, and the pity in her eyes was almost worse than the betrayal. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe. Or maybe he just wanted to feel young and wanted and seen again. Maybe I made him feel something he'd been missing. I don't know, Maggie. I wish I did." I stood up. I couldn't sit there any longer looking at her face. A face so similar to my own, that shared our mother's eyes and our father's smile. A face I'd known my whole life. A face that had just become a stranger's. "I want you to leave," I said. "Maggie, I want you to leave my house. And I want you to stop seeing my husband. I want you to pack up whatever relationship or affair or whatever you want to call it, and I want you to end it. Today, Patricia stood too. And then what? Then we figure out whether my marriage is worth saving, and whether I can ever forgive you, and what this family is going to look like when everyone else finds out. Because they will find out. I won't keep this secret. David asked me not to tell anyone, Patricia said, and the words came out small and stupid. She heard how stupid they sounded too. She covered her face with her hands. Of course he did, I said. That's what people do when they're afraid of consequences. They ask their conspirators to keep quiet. That's what you and David are now. You know, conspirators, people who made a deal to lie and pretend together. I walked to the door and opened it. Leave, I said. And don't come back until you've ended things with David, and you can look me in the eye and tell me you understand what you've destroyed. Patricia hesitated for a moment, like she wanted to say something else. But there was nothing left to say. She gathered her purse and walked to the door, and as she passed me, she reached out like she was going to touch my arm. I stepped back. She dropped her hand and walked out to her car. I watched from the doorway as she sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, forehead pressed against the steering wheel. Then she started the car and drove away. I closed the door and locked it, though I had no idea why. Nothing could protect me anymore. Nothing could keep out the truth that was already inside. Destroying everything, I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water with shaking hands. I drank it standing at the sink, looking out at the garden I'd spent weeks tending in the spring. The tomatoes were turning red now. The roses were beginning to bloom. Life was continuing on schedule, following its natural progression, as if my world hadn't just exploded. Then I heard David's car in the driveway. It was only 12:47 p.m. He wasn't supposed to be home for hours. My stomach clenched. Had Patricia called him? Had she warned him? I heard him unlock the door. Maggie, I'm home early. I forgot a file I need for the Hartley account. I stood very still in the kitchen, trying to decide what I was going to do. Confront him? Not yet, I wasn't ready. I didn't know what I was going to say. David appeared in the doorway to the kitchen. He looked tired, I noticed, and guilty. There was something about the way he was holding his body that screamed guilt. A slight tension in his shoulders, a hesitation in his movement, like he was walking across thin ice. You okay? He asked. You look upset. I looked at my husband. This man I'd promised to spend my life with, this man I'd loved for 42 years, this man who had broken every promise he'd ever made to me, and I made a choice. When were you going to tell me about Patricia? I asked. The color drained from his face. I watched it happen. Watched him understand that it was over, that the secret was out, that there was no more hiding behind overtime and work meetings and late nights at the office. How did you? He started, but I cut him off. The hotel receipt. The messages on the iPad. Everything, David. I know everything. He sat down in one of the kitchen chairs like his legs had given out underneath him. Maggie. I can explain. I don't want your explanation, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was. I want you to tell me the truth. All of it. And I want you to tell me whether this marriage is something you actually want, or whether you want a divorce. The word hung in the air between us like something with teeth. Divorce. After 42 years. David looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: recognition. Like he was finally actually seeing me, the real me, the woman standing in front of him, not the invisible wife he'd grown tired of, not the person he'd learned to dismiss. Just me? Margaret, his wife? I don't know, he said quietly. I honestly don't know. We sat in that kitchen for 3 hours, not talking at first. Just sitting. The afternoon light moved across the table in a slow arc, and neither of us moved to turn on the lights as it began to fade. We just sat in the growing darkness, like two people waiting for a storm to pass. Finally, David spoke. I need to explain, he said. Start from the beginning, I told him. And I want the truth. Not what you think will make me feel better. Not a version of events designed to excuse you. The truth. He rubbed his face with both hands. He suddenly looked very old. I wondered if he'd always looked this old and I'd just stopped noticing. Or if this, the stress of the affair, the weight of the lie, had aged him. Perhaps we'd both been aging all along, and neither of us had bothered to look at the other closely enough to notice. I've been unhappy, he started. For how long? I asked. Longer than I care to admit. The words landed like a slap. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know how to, he said. And there was something like desperation in his voice. Because I didn't want to hurt you. Because I thought if I just worked harder and pushed through, it would go away. And because I was a coward, I waited for him to continue. You became so absorbed in your books, in your retirement projects, in your garden, he said. And I became this shadow in my own life. I'd come home, and you'd be reading or working in the garden, and we'd have dinner, and we'd watch television, and we'd go to bed. And you seemed perfectly content, and I started to feel like I didn't even exist. So the solution was to have an affair with my sister, I heard myself say, and my voice was sharp as broken glass. No, he said quickly. God, no. But when Patricia came to me that day at the barbecue and she was broken and lost, I felt needed for the first time in years. She looked at me like I mattered. Like I wasn't invisible, like I was someone worth talking to, worth spending time with. And I let myself enjoy that feeling. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A few cars passed. A woman walked by with a dog. The world was going about its business, completely unconcerned with the fact that my marriage was dissolving in real time. Did you love her? I asked, not turning around. I thought I did, David said. But now, I don't know. I think I was in love with how she made me feel about myself. That's different, isn't it? Yes, I said. That's very different, and much worse, if you ask me. Because that means you destroyed this family, you betrayed your wife of 42 years, you hurt your sister, all because you were feeling sorry for yourself. I know, he said. His voice broke slightly. God, I know that now. I should have talked to you. I should have told you I was unhappy. We could have gone to therapy. We could have tried to fix things. Instead, I ran away. Like a selfish coward, I turned back to face him. Is it still going on? With Patricia? Not anymore. She called me while I was driving back from the office. She said you'd confronted her, that she'd ended things. I asked her to, I said. I told her to make a choice. David nodded slowly. So what happens now? He asked. Do you want me to leave? Are we getting divorced? Those words. Divorce. The end of everything we'd built. I sank back into my chair because my legs felt like they were made of water. I don't know, I said, echoing his words from earlier. A few hours ago I was so angry I wanted to burn everything down. I wanted to destroy you the way you've destroyed me. But now, I trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. But now what? He prompted gently. Now I'm just tired, I said. I'm tired and sad and I feel like I don't know who you are anymore. Free and I don't know who I am in relation to you. For 42 years I was Mrs. David Richardson. I was the wife, the partner, the support system. And now I feel like that identity has been ripped away from me, and I don't know what's left underneath. David started to cry then. Not dramatically, just quietly, with tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Maggie, he said. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't undo what I've done. But I'm so desperately, terribly sorry. I watched him cry and felt something inside me crack open a little. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something like compassion, maybe. Or perhaps just the recognition that we were both broken now, both casualties of whatever had gone wrong between us. I can't make a decision tonight, I said finally. I can't decide whether I want to try to save this or let it go. I'm too raw. I'm too angry and too hurt. What do you want to do? He asked. I thought about it. I want you to move out. Not forever, necessarily, but for now. I need space. I need time to think and process and figure out who I am without you here reminding me of all the pain. David nodded. Okay, I can do that. I'll go to a hotel. Or I could stay with someone from work. I don't care where you go, I said, and I meant it. Just go. He got up and packed a bag. I sat in the living room listening to him move around upstairs, opening and closing drawers, gathering his things. The sounds were all familiar. The creak of the floorboards in our bedroom, the squeak of the bathroom faucet. But they felt alien now, like I was hearing them from very far away. When he came downstairs, he was carrying a suitcase and his laptop bag. He looked at me standing by the window, backlit by the last of the evening light, and something like recognition flickered across his face again. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. We should talk to Sarah. She should hear this from us. Not yet, I said. I'm not ready to tell her yet. He nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. Maggie, I really am. Don't. I cut him off. Just don't. Not right now. He left. I heard his car start up. I heard him pull out of the driveway. And then the house was silent in a way it had never been silent before. It was the silence of a life ending. Not death, exactly, but a kind of ending nonetheless. I stood alone in my living room as the sun finally set and darkness settled over everything, and I realized that I had no idea what came next. I had spent 42 years being a wife, and now I wasn't sure if I still was one. I had spent my entire adult life building this life, this marriage, this identity, and now I had to figure out who I was in its absence. It was terrifying. And oddly, underneath the terror, I felt something else stirring. Something that felt almost like freedom, though I wasn't sure I had the right to feel that yet. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would answer no matter what time of day or night it was. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said when she picked up. "Everything okay?" "No," I said. "Everything is very much not okay, and I think I need to tell you what's been happening." "What do you mean?" Her voice had shifted, become alert. "Are you sick? Is Dad sick? Can you come over tomorrow?" I asked. "I'll explain everything then. But first I need to call someone." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long moment. Then I looked up the number for a divorce attorney, James Chen, someone who'd been recommended to me years ago by a friend. I'd always thought I'd never need it. I'd thought I'd be married forever. I left him a voicemail asking for an appointment as soon as possible. Then I went upstairs to bed alone, our bed. The bed David and I had shared for 42 years. The bed where we'd made love and had nightmares and talked about our dreams and grown old together. I lay on my side of it, in the space I'd occupied for all those decades, and I cried. Not for the loss of David exactly, but for the loss of the life I thought I had. For the loss of the woman I thought I was. The loyal wife, the patient partner. The woman who understood sacrifice and compromise. Tomorrow I would call my sister and tell her we couldn't have contact for a while. Tomorrow I would tell my daughter that her father had betrayed her mother. Tomorrow I would begin the process of unraveling 42 years of marriage. But tonight, I was alone in the darkness, and I let myself feel the full weight of it all. Sarah arrived at my house at 10 a.m. the next morning, before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. She looked panicked. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her face was free of makeup, and she was wearing the same worried expression she'd worn when she was a teenager and thought something was terribly wrong. "Mom," she said, pulling me into a tight hug as soon as I opened the door. "What's going on? You scared me half to death." I held her for a moment, breathing in the familiar smell of her shampoo, and tried to find the words. "How do you tell your daughter that her father, the man she'd respected her whole life, the man who'd taught her about honesty and integrity, had been living a lie?" "Come sit down," I said, leading her to the kitchen table. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you react." She sat down and I could see the fear in her eyes. "Are you okay? Is Dad okay? Is it cancer?" "Oh God, it's cancer, isn't it?" "No one has cancer," I said quickly. "But something has happened that's going to change our family, and you deserve to know the truth," I told her. Not all the details. I spared her some of the more intimate revelations, but the essential truth. Your father had an affair with Aunt Patricia for the past 8 months. He's moved out. We're probably getting divorced. I watched her process it. I watched shock give way to anger, anger give way to hurt give way to a kind of betrayed numbness. "How could he?" she said finally, her voice very small. "How could he do this to you? To us? He said he was unhappy," I told her. "He said he felt invisible in his own marriage." "So that justified an affair?" Sarah's voice rose. "That justified destroying your marriage and hurting you?" "No," I said. "Nothing justifies it, but I'm trying to understand it. And maybe we both need to try to understand it if we're going to move forward." Sarah stood up and paced the kitchen, running her hands through her hair. "I can't believe this. I honestly cannot believe this. And with Aunt Patricia, that's worse somehow. That's a betrayal on 2 levels." "I know," I said quietly. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Are you going to divorce him?" "I think so," I said. "I don't see how we come back from this. But I need time to talk to a lawyer to understand my options, to figure out what the practical realities are." Sarah sat back down. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry this is happening. You don't deserve this." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you for that. But sweetie, I need you to hear something from me, and I need you to really listen." "Okay," she said. "This is not your responsibility," I told her. "Your father made his choices and I'm making mine. But this is between me and him. Don't let this come between you and your father unless you decide that's what you need to do for yourself. This is his mistake to own and his consequence to bear, but he's still your father. How can you be so reasonable about this?" Sarah asked, and there were tears in her eyes. "He betrayed you." "I know," I said, "and I'm angry. God, I'm so angry." But I'm also learning something about myself right now, and I think it's important. I'm learning that I have choices. I don't have to be destroyed by this. I don't have to spend the rest of my life being the victim of his infidelity. I can acknowledge what happened, I can be furious about it, I can protect myself legally and financially, and I can still choose to not let it define me. Sarah wiped her eyes. You're stronger than I am, she said. No, I told her. I'm just older. And I've learned that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. We sat together for a long time after that, talking about practical things. I explained what I knew about the divorce process. I promised her I would keep her updated without dumping all the details on her. I assured her that this didn't change her relationship with her father unless she wanted it to. By the time she left, she looked fractionally less devastated, though I knew this would hit her harder as time went on. The full weight of betrayal takes time to settle. It's not something you process all at once. After Sarah left, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my therapist, Dr. Patricia Morrison, a different Patricia. Thankfully, had been my therapist 15 years ago when I was going through a period of depression after my mother passed away. I'd seen her for about a year and then stopped when I felt better. I had her number in my old address book. She answered her own phone, which surprised me. This is Patricia speaking. Hi, it's Maggie Richardson. I know this is random, but I saw you for therapy about 15 years ago, and I was wondering if you had any openings. I'm going through something and I think I need to talk to someone. Maggie, she said, and she sounded genuinely pleased. I remember you. How wonderful to hear from you. Let me check my schedule. She had an opening the following week. I booked it and felt, for the first time since I'd found that receipt, like I was taking concrete steps toward something. Not healing yet. It was far too soon for that, but at least movement in that direction. Over the next few days I threw myself into the practical aspects of what was happening. I met with James Chen, the divorce attorney, and learned about asset division and alimony and all the legal machinery that would be required to untangle 42 years of marriage. It was surreal and exhausting and occasionally infuriating. But it was also necessary. I learned that David and I would need to divide our assets. We'd have to sell the house eventually unless I wanted to buy him out of his share. I learned about his retirement accounts and my own limited savings. I learned about health insurance and taxes and all the things that are usually in the background of a marriage, but become the foreground when the marriage is ending. James was kind, but straightforward. You'll come through this okay, he told me. It won't be painless, but you'll be fine financially. David was honest about his assets, and you have legitimate claims. It's not about the money, I told him. Money doesn't fix what's broken. No, he agreed, but it helps you start over. I also did something harder. I called Patricia. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting for me to call. Maggie. Her voice was tentative, hopeful, apologetic, everything at once. I'm not calling to forgive you, I said. I just want you to know where I stand, and I want to hear from you what you're planning to do. I've ended things with David completely, Patricia said. I told him that I can't see him anymore, that I can't do this to you. He tried to convince me otherwise, but I told him no. Has he accepted that? I think so, she said. He's struggling with it. But I think he understands. Good, I said. As for us, I can't have a relationship with you right now. Not while all of this is happening. You made a choice to betray me, and I'm making a choice to protect myself by creating distance between us. Patricia started to cry. I understand. I know I don't deserve anything from you. That's right, you don't, I said, and my voice was steady. But I'll tell you this, I might forgive you someday. Not today. Probably not for a long time. But eventually, I might get to a place where I can understand what happened and why, and I might be able to forgive it. But we're not there yet. I'll wait, Patricia said. I'll wait as long as it takes. And Maggie, I'm truly sorry. For everything. I hung up without responding. Not because I was being cruel, but because I didn't have anything else to say. Apologies can't undo betrayal. They're necessary, but they're not enough. That night, I sat in the garden with a cup of tea and watched the light fade. The tomatoes I'd tended were beginning to ripen. The roses had bloomed into full, fragrant flowers. The world was continuing on its cycle, indifferent to my pain, and there was something comforting in that. Life didn't stop because my marriage had ended. Growth didn't halt just because I was hurting. I thought about the woman I'd been just a week ago. The woman who thought her husband was working late, The woman who was invisible in her own marriage. The woman who'd internalized the idea that her unhappiness was something to be managed quietly, without complaint. That woman felt like a stranger now, and I didn't think I wanted her back. I had a long road ahead of me. There would be lawyers and paperwork, and difficult conversations. There would be moments when I'd question every decision I was making. There would be grief. Grief for the marriage I thought I had, grief for the years I'd spent trying to be the perfect wife, grief for the sister I was losing, at least temporarily. But underneath all of that, I felt something else stirring. I felt the beginning of something that I couldn't quite name yet. It felt like a door opening. It felt like possibility. I was 67 years old, and for the first time in 4 decades, I was going to have to figure out who I was when I wasn't being someone else's wife. The thought terrified me, and it excited me in equal measure. 3 months had passed since I found the receipt. The house had sold faster than I expected. The market was good, and apparently, it's easier to sell a house when you're not living in the shadow of a betrayal. Or maybe I was just ready to let it go. David bought out my share of the equity, and we split the proceeds. It wasn't generous, but it was fair. James Chen made sure of that. I'd found a small apartment in the downtown area of our town, a 2-bedroom with large windows and a balcony where I could grow some of my plants. It was nothing like the house. It was smaller and newer, and completely mine in a way the house had never been. There was no ghost of David in every room, no memory of 42 years of partnership lurking in the corners. I liked my apartment. I was surprised by how much I liked it. My first session with Dr. Morrison had been difficult. I'd cried for most of it. But over the 3 months of weekly therapy, something had shifted inside me. I was beginning to understand the patterns I'd fallen into, the way I'd become smaller and smaller over the years, accommodating David's needs, accepting his distance, not demanding the intimacy and attention I deserved. "You were so focused on being a good wife," Dr. Morrison had said during one session, "that you forgot to be a person." The words had stung, but they were true. In therapy, I was learning to be a person again. A full person, not a supporting character in someone else's story. I'd also started a book club. Not the one I'd joined 3 years ago. That one was full of women who knew David and kept asking me uncomfortable questions about the divorce. This one was new, meeting at the local library, and it was full of women from all walks of life, all ages, all stages of their own personal revolutions. The first meeting, I was terrified. I sat in the corner of the library room, holding a copy of The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and tried to remember how to be social with strangers. But then a woman about my age named Helen sat down next to me and said, "Is this your first time?" And suddenly I had a friend. Helen had been divorced for 5 years. She'd left a marriage of 38 years because her husband had become emotionally abusive. We talked for 2 hours after the first book club meeting, sitting in the library after everyone else had left, and she told me her story and I told her mine, and we found something in each other's experiences that felt like recognition. The hardest part, Helen had said, wasn't leaving. It was forgiving myself for staying so long. I thought about that often. I'd also started taking a watercolor class at the community center. I'd always wanted to paint but had never had time when I was teaching, or when David needed something, or when I was busy being Mrs. Richardson. Now I had time. Now I had nothing but time, stretching out in front of me like a blank canvas. I wasn't very good at painting. My brushstrokes were tentative, my colors sometimes muddy, my compositions awkward. But there was something liberating about creating something ugly without apologizing for it. About not needing it to be perfect. About the process mattering more than the product. The instructor, a woman named Maria who was probably in her 50s, said to me one day, "You paint like you're afraid of taking up space." I looked at her, startled. "Is that a bad thing?" "It's just an observation," she said kindly. "But I've noticed that your paintings get bigger and bolder as the class goes on. By week 6, you're using the whole canvas. By week 12, you're not even worried about staying in the lines. I think you're learning to take up space, and your paintings are reflecting that journey." I started looking at my paintings differently after that. In the first few weeks, everything I'd painted was small and tucked into the corner of the paper. By now, in month 3, my paintings sprawled and took up the entire space. They were still not good, but they were bold. They were unapologetic. I was becoming bolder too, more unapologetic. In the grocery store, I didn't automatically defer to other shoppers reaching for items. At the bank, I asked questions about my finances instead of assuming the banker knew better than I did. At dinner with Sarah and her family, I shared my opinions without worrying that I was talking too much. The divorce had been finalized 2 months ago. 60 days after David and I signed the papers, we were officially no longer married. I'd worn a blue dress to the courthouse, not out of any symbolic statement, but just because I liked the dress. Sarah had come with me, and afterward, we'd gone to lunch and celebrated with champagne and oysters. "Are you sad?" Sarah had asked me as we clinked glasses. "A little," I admitted, "but mostly I'm relieved, and grateful, and a little bit excited about what comes next." She'd smiled at me then, and I saw in her face a kind of pride. Pride in me for surviving something difficult. Pride in me for not falling apart. Pride in me for choosing myself. My contact with Patricia had slowly evolved. She hadn't stopped trying. She'd sent flowers on my birthday with a note that said, "Thinking of you on your special day. I miss my sister." I hadn't responded, but I hadn't thrown them away either. I'd put them in a vase on my balcony and watched them bloom and fade. About 2 months after the affair came to light, Patricia had emailed me. A long email, carefully written, explaining her own unhappiness in her marriage before the divorce, her own sense of being unseen and unvalued, and how David's attention had felt like a lifeline. She wasn't excusing what she'd done. She was explicit that it was inexcusable, but she was contextualizing it. She was helping me understand not just what happened, but why. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I was beginning to understand her. And understanding, I was learning, was the first step toward forgiveness. I hadn't seen much of David. He'd moved to an apartment across town. We'd had a few interactions, exchanging some pieces of furniture, discussing some bills that needed to be paid jointly, but they were cordial and brief. He looked diminished, somehow smaller, like the affair and its aftermath had taken something out of him that he couldn't get back. "I'm sorry," he'd said to me one day when he came to pick up some boxes of his things. "I know I've said it before, but I mean it. I'm so sorry, Maggie. I know you are." I'd told him, and I did know. He was sorry. But sorry doesn't undo anything. Sorry doesn't give you back the years you wasted. Sorry doesn't restore the trust that was broken. "Do you think you could ever forgive me?" he'd asked. I'd thought about it carefully before answering. "I think I will eventually," I'd said. "But it's going to take time. And David, I want you to understand something. I'm not forgiving you for you. I'm forgiving you for me. Because I refuse to let this consume the rest of my life. I refuse to carry this anger into my future." He'd nodded, and I'd seen tears in his eyes. But I hadn't felt moved to comfort him. That wasn't my role anymore. One afternoon in my apartment, I was sitting on my balcony with a cup of coffee and my latest watercolor painting, a landscape of trees in autumn, all golds and oranges and deep reds, when I realized something. I was happy, not in a profound or life-changing way, just in a simple, everyday way. I was happy to be alone. I was happy with my own company. I was happy to wake up in the morning without knowing what the day would demand of me and being okay with that uncertainty. For the first time in 42 years, I wasn't living for anyone else. I wasn't trying to be the perfect wife or the supportive partner. I wasn't shrinking myself to make room for someone else's needs. I was just living for me, and discovering that I actually liked who I was when I wasn't performing that role. I thought back to that woman, the woman I'd been just 3 months ago, standing in her kitchen with a receipt trembling in her hands, and I barely recognized her. I was no longer that woman. I was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who knew her own value and wouldn't tolerate being invisible ever again. That night, Helen called me. We'd become close friends over the past 3 months, having coffee several times a week and talking for hours about our lives and our marriages and our futures. "I'm thinking of taking a trip," she said, "to Italy, alone. Just me in a rental car and whatever happens. Want to come?" I thought about it for maybe 2 seconds. "Yes," I said, "absolutely yes. Really?" She sounded delighted. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to leave so soon after everything." "That's exactly why I want to go," I told her. "Because everything I've been afraid of has already happened. My marriage ended. My world changed. I survived it. So why not take a trip to Italy?" We made plans on the phone for the next hour. We looked at flights and made a rough itinerary. We talked about staying in small towns and eating pasta and walking through museums and not having any fixed agenda. It felt like we were planning an adventure, not just a vacation. When I hung up, I stood on my balcony and looked out at the city lights stretching across the dark. My marriage was over. My family structure had fundamentally changed. Everything I thought was solid had turned out to be temporary. But I was still here. I was still standing. I was still breathing and dreaming and planning trips to Italy. And I realized that I had never felt more alive. I was arranging flowers on my kitchen table when Sarah called. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Just checking in. How are you feeling about today?" Today, our wedding anniversary. Not my wedding anniversary. That had been almost 43 years ago now, and it had ended in betrayal and heartbreak. No, today was different. Today was the 1-year anniversary of the day I found the receipt, the day my world cracked open, the day everything changed. "I'm good," I told her, and I meant it. "Actually, I'm really good." "That's wonderful," Sarah said. "Are you doing anything special?" "Helen and I are going for lunch," I said, "and then I have a painting class. And tonight, I'm meeting with my therapist." Dr. Morrison wanted to mark the occasion. "That sounds perfect," Sarah said. "Very on brand for the new you." I laughed. The new me had become something of a joke between us, but it was a loving joke. Sarah was proud of me. She'd watched me transform from a woman who'd accepted invisibility to a woman who demanded to be seen, and it had changed her too. She'd told me recently that she was setting better boundaries in her own marriage, that watching me stand up for myself had given her permission to do the same. "How are you doing?" I asked her. "Good. The kids are good, Mark is good, life is good. I'm glad." I said, "Your father was here last weekend." This was new. A few months ago, Sarah had invited David to her house for dinner. I'd been nervous about it, but Sarah had been clear she wasn't choosing sides. She was his daughter, and he was her father, and she loved him. But she also loved and supported me. David and I had run into each other at Sarah's house and had actually had a civil conversation. It was brief and somewhat awkward, but there was no anger in it anymore. There was sadness and regret, and the recognition of time lost, but not anger. "He mentioned that he's seeing someone," Sarah said carefully. "A woman he met at his therapist office. He seemed happy." I felt a small twist in my chest at this news, but I examined it and found that it wasn't jealousy or hurt, it was acceptance. David was moving on. He was building a new life too, and I was genuinely glad that he might find some happiness in it, even if that happiness wasn't with me. "I hope she's good to him," I said. And I meant it. After Sarah and I hung up, I finished arranging the flowers, dahlias and roses and some greenery from the farmer's market, and stepped back to look at them. They were beautiful, bold, unapologetic. Just like the painting I was working on in Maria's class. Just like the woman I was becoming. I'd been back to therapy to talk about this day, this anniversary of the worst day of my life. Morrison had helped me reframe it. "This isn't the anniversary of the end of your marriage," she'd said. "It's the anniversary of the beginning of your life. The day you chose yourself." She was right. I had chosen myself, and it had saved me. Over the past year, I'd done things I never would have done when I was married. I'd traveled. I'd taken that trip to Italy with Helen, and it had been absolutely transformative. We'd driven through Tuscany and eaten in tiny villages and stayed in rooms with arched ceilings and ancient walls. I'd felt young in Italy. Even though I was 68, I'd felt alive. I'd also gone back to school. Just one class, audit status, but I was taking a course in literature at the community college. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to be the kind of person who was always learning, always growing, always curious about the world. I'd made new friends. Beyond Helen, I'd connected with Maria from my painting class and with a woman named Dorothy from my book club. We met for coffee and complained about our various aches and pains and laughed about the absurdities of aging. But we also supported each other. We celebrated each other's victories and helped each other through the difficult moments. I'd even reconnected, tentatively, with Patricia. It took me 8 months to get there. 8 months of therapy and processing and learning to separate my sister's betrayal from my love for my sister. Dr. Morrison had helped me understand that I could hold both truths at the same time. Patricia had deeply hurt me, and I could still love her. She'd made a terrible choice, and I could still forgive her for making it. About 9 months after the affair was revealed, I'd called her and asked her to meet me for coffee. We met at a small cafe downtown, and she'd looked like she might be sick when she saw me walk in. I sat down across from her, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. "I'm not ready to be close the way we were," I told her. "And I'm not sure I'll ever be. But I'm ready to see you as a person again, not just as the person who betrayed me." Patricia had cried, but she'd nodded. "I understand, and I'm grateful for that. For the possibility of reconciliation, even if it's slow." We'd started meeting for coffee once a month. We talked carefully, like we were learning a new language. Some conversations were easier than others. But we were rebuilding something. Not the relationship we'd had. That was broken and probably couldn't be repaired in quite the same way. But something new. Something based on honesty and boundaries and real understanding rather than assumptions and taken for granted loyalty. A few months ago, Patricia had told me that she was also in therapy, working on the same issues I was working on learning to value herself properly, to not disappear into other people's needs, to make better choices. She'd told me that my strength in standing up for myself had inspired her to do the same. You showed me that leaving doesn't make you a bad person, she'd said. That protecting yourself isn't selfish. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. I thought she might have been talking about her relationship with David, but she was really talking about all the ways she'd abandoned herself over the years. Just like I had. That evening, Helen picked me up for our lunch. We went to a new restaurant downtown that had just opened. As we sat at our table, waiting for our food, Helen reached across and squeezed my hand. "Happy anniversary," she said. "The anniversary of the best decision you ever made." "Which one?" I asked. "Leaving David, going to Italy, taking the painting class, starting therapy. All of it," Helen said. "Every choice you made to choose yourself, that's what we're celebrating today." We raised our glasses to that, and I felt a swell of gratitude so large it nearly took my breath away. A year ago, I was a woman with her world falling apart. Today I was a woman with a life I was building intentionally. Every choice was mine. Every day was mine. Every moment was mine to shape however I wanted. That afternoon, in Dr. Morrison's office, I told her everything I'd done over the past year. "I'm proud of you," she said. "But more importantly, I think you're proud of yourself." "I am." I admitted. "I'm really proud of myself. And that's new. I don't think I ever felt proud of myself before. I felt like I'd done what was expected, met the requirements, played my part. But I didn't actually believe in myself." "And now?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Now I believe that I'm worth believing in," I said. "I believe that my happiness matters. I believe that I deserve love and respect and attention. And I believe that I can build a life that's fulfilling, even at 60, 8 years old, even after 40, 2 years of marriage, even after the worst heartbreak I've ever experienced." Dr. Morrison smiled. "That's quite a journey." "It is," I agreed. "And the best part is it's not over. I have so much more life to live. So many more paintings to paint, books to read, places to travel to, people to connect with. There's so much possibility." That night, I did something I hadn't done in a year. I looked at old photographs of David and me. Our wedding photos where I was young and glowing and full of hope. Photos from our anniversary celebrations over the years. Photos of us at Sarah's wedding, at our grandchildren's births, at family gatherings. I looked at them without anger now. Just with a kind of bittersweet recognition. That woman in the photographs, that younger version of me, she did the best she could with the life she had. She loved deeply. She tried hard. She didn't know how to set boundaries or ask for what she needed. But she was doing her best. And this woman, the woman I am now, I'm doing my best too. But my best looks different. My best includes walking away from things that no longer serve me. My best includes being honest about what I want. My best includes taking up space and refusing to be invisible. The receipt, the one that started everything, I'd kept it. Not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a reminder of the moment I chose myself. I'd framed it, actually, and hung it in my apartment. Not to dwell on the past, but to remember that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are also the beginning of something better. I'd written something on the frame, in my own handwriting. The day I found out I was stronger than I thought I was. The day I learned that I deserved better. The day my life began. Looking at it now, I realized something. If I could go back to that woman in the kitchen, holding that receipt with trembling hands, I wouldn't change what happened. I wouldn't warn her away from the pain or tell her to fix things before they broke. Because the pain had led me here. To this apartment, to this woman I'd become, to this life that was entirely, authentically mine, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.